So last week even, we had a driver who was instructed to show up to a physical, a DOT physical. It was found out by the medical examiner that he had a bottle of fake urine on him.
So the new Clearinghouse rule is coming out, Chris. And
Yep.
that's November 18th, right?
Yeah, November 18th is when Rule 2 takes place.
We know this is going to affect a lot of people in the industry, but it really comes down to how's it going to affect the driver?
On the whole, it shouldn't affect very many people. That's our hope, right? It's really only going to start affecting people who are currently in a prohibited status in the clearinghouse. So the average driver who has never had a positive drug test before, they should be just fine.
So this will be positive or refuse, right?
Yeah, positive or refuse.
What is the effect going to be on that driver that's, let's say, has had a positive drug test and never really went back through the return to work process? What's going to happen to them?
Yeah, so if you're currently in a prohibited status, starting on November 18th, state licensing agencies are going to be mandated to start downgrading CDLs. So anyone who has prohibited status in the clearinghouse, their CDL is going to be downgraded to just a regular Class D or a driver's license.
So they'll have to go through the return to work process and then also through a reinstatement process through their DMV, right?
Yep, correct.
And the last time you and I checked, which was in September, that's going to affect 177,000 drivers in the industry.
Yeah.
A lot of those drivers probably aren't driving today because they haven't completed that return to duty process. So what are some of the other effects that it's going to have on drivers, companies, any of that?
As long as the company is staying up to date on running regular queries on their drivers, it shouldn't be an issue. It's the post effects, right? Or what's going to happen after the fact. If a driver gets stopped on a roadside that drives for a company that hasn't been running those regular queries, then it's going to show on that roadside inspection that that driver no longer has a CDL. So now you're going to be cited for driving while in a prohibited status and driving a commercial vehicle without a required CDL or proper endorsement.
Yeah, and I just want to speak to the recruiting process a little bit. As a recruiter, I've been doing this a long time, and a lot of times we don't get those queries back until real late in the funnel, real late, like sometimes even when a driver shows up to orientation and there's a negative mark on there. This is going to stop that, because if a driver actually has a negative mark and hasn't gone through the return to duty process, or otherwise known as SAP, their CDL is going to show up as invalid, right? So then me as a recruiter, I'm going to be able to see that long before we even do a clearinghouse query.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, as far as what a driver can do to just kind of be in compliance and be aware of what's going on, what can a driver do today?
Yeah. The phrase I always use is protect your license and protect your CDL, right? So one of the things you can do to protect your CDL right now is, if you haven't already, go into the clearinghouse and sign up. It's totally free if you hold a CDL, and you can run your own queries on your own CDL for free as a driver. The only people that are paying for the queries are us on the company side of things. But that way you can see that, you can see your status, that you are not prohibited as long as you haven't done anything to place yourself in a prohibited status.
Sure.
The other thing too, the nice part to that, with it being free, if there is a record that was entered erroneously, you can actually challenge that as well as a driver. You do have that right if something was entered under a wrong CDL number or a wrong driver, or something that just a driver would need to contest. There is a process in place for you to go and stand up for your rights to drive a commercial vehicle. Awesome.
Yeah, and just so drivers are aware, there's a couple of other times that these queries are going to be ran. Number one, anytime you switch a job to be able to be certified to perform safety sensitive functions for that company, they'll need to run a query. And that's a full query. And then annually, as a company, for drivers that are on for a year or longer, we need to run what's called a partial query, right?
Limited, but yes.
Limited? Okay. What is the difference for us as the employer and for the driver between a full and a limited query?
Not a whole lot. Really, it's just going to show, are they in that prohibited status or not? A full query is going to give us the big picture, everything that's been reported since the clearinghouse started in 2020. But the limited query is going to look back just at since the last time a query was ran on that driver.
Awesome. So just to talk a little bit about kind of what affects a driver, what can affect a driver in the clearinghouse. That can be anything from just flat out testing positive, a refusal, which can look like a lot of different things. For example, Chris, I had a driver last week that showed up to a drug testing facility. That there's an issue with the sample, so they needed to give him another sample. And during the time he was waiting to be able to produce again, he stepped outside the building, even though he was told not to step outside the building. And the DOT, not ATS, but the DOT requires that testing facility to then deem that as a refusal. So now that's going to show up on the clearinghouse, and that driver is going to be put in a prohibited status. I know there's lots of other examples, but that's just kind of an extreme one where the driver didn't actually leave. He just stepped outside the facility.
To have a cigarette, right?
Yeah. I think he had to make a phone call, but whatever the reason might be, the bad thing about that is I know the drivers are instructed not to step outside the facility. Once you've begun the process of a drug test, if you're instructed to do something, just follow through with those instructions to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So last week even, we had a driver who was instructed to show up to a physical, a DOT physical. He was not scheduled to do a drug screen. And as he was emptying his pockets and getting ready to, I think he was about to get on the scale, if I remember right, it was found out by the medical examiner that he had a bottle of fake urine on him.
Wow.
So he brought a tampering device into a DOT physical, not even a drug test. And that led to a series of questions by that medical examiner. And it was found out that, he had consumed edibles a couple days prior, so he was bringing that bottle of fake urine to cover his bases. At least that's what he thought.
Yeah, and that would be an example of, because that was disclosed to a medical professional and in a DOT capacity, now that is going to be reported to the clearinghouse as well. Correct?
Yeah, that falls under actual knowledge.
Correct. So, around the drug and alcohol testing, there's a lot of good advice, a lot of misadvice out there. What would be one of those things that you would think you hear from drivers that just isn't actually true, but it's come to be something that's believed by a lot of drivers?
Yeah, one thing that I've been seeing quite a bit, especially online, are drivers that are concerned that if they are now placed in a prohibited status moving forward, they'll never be eligible for a CDL ever again. Not true. You actually do, I think you touched on it before, you do have to go through the return to work process, see a SAP, and you can have your commercial driving privileges reinstated. One of the difficulties behind that drivers should keep in mind is that return to work process on average takes about 6 months to complete, which actually leads to another myth that some people have been hearing, is that, well, if you have your CDL taken away because you're in a prohibited status, does that mean I have to go to CDL school again? And again, no, not necessarily. That's where it just comes on the driver's responsibility to make sure they're going through that return to duty process in a timely manner. If a driver were to procrastinate performing that return to duty function over the course of, say 2 years, then they might have to go and retest. It varies a little bit from state to state on what that timeline is for when they make you retest or go back to school. But if you're responsible and you take care of it, you can have your privileges reinstated right away.
Sure. So if a driver has a life situation where that seems to stretch out a little bit for whatever reason, they're going to want to check specifically with their state DMV and what those requirements would be, right?
Exactly. Yeah, every state has a slight tweak to what their timeline is.
Yep. The biggest one I run into as a recruiter is there's this misknowledge, however you want to phrase it, of drivers believing that we are the ones doing the drug test. We may set it up, but it is always set up through a third-party entity, and that third-party entity is a DOT certified drug testing facility, right? They are governed by themselves. So if there's an issue at the clinic, us as a company, ATS, recruiting, doesn't matter. We don't have power to go into that clinic and tell them what they need to be doing. So that's something I think drivers really need to understand, is that once a company sets that drug test up, now that relationship is between that driver and that drug testing facility. We only get the results.
Yeah.